Snow-covered vans that never move, ghost addresses billing millions, over 1,000 companies, 90% owned by just one community alone, all collecting massive Medicaid payments for medical transport that neighbors say never happens. Federal investigators are now asking, is this the largest welfare fraud scheme in American history? You see, your tax dollars are funding what appears to be a systematic fraud on an industrial scale. We're talking about millions flowing to companies that exist only on paper, while real Americans struggle to afford health care. You see, this is not just about Minnesota. This is about patterns that we're seeing emerging in Seattle, where the mayor is actively refusing to investigate. If the scheme is replicated nationwide, we could be looking at billions in stolen taxpayer money. Billions. We already know it's about $20 billion. That's just from what we know previously from the investigations. Now you add in the medical transport. Holy cow. This is bigger than anyone ever expected. So the political implications are explosive. How do you ignore fraud this obvious without being complicit? When neighbors can see vans buried in snow for months while payments flow, someone in government had to know. And who was getting paid? Now, some breaking news on a metal most people overlook, but governments and defense contractors prioritize every single day: titanium. The company positioning itself to lead is SAGA Metals, trading as SAGMF in the U.S. and SAGA in Canada. You see, titanium's lightweight, incredibly strong, and corrosion resistant, essentially a defense metal. Now, up to 20% of total titanium consumption goes into defense, and an F-35 fighter jet can be 40% titanium by weight. Now, these jets are actively deployed near Venezuelan airspace. North America's titanium supply is becoming critical. Greenland is emerging as a strategic hub, and SAGA Metals gives investors exposure to this Arctic supply story. Now, they are drilling at early stage valuations right as titanium moves to the top of defense priorities. They are the one to watch. SAGA Metals, you need to see their full briefing. It is linked down below. But back to Minnesota, because this fraud rabbit hole goes even deeper. Here's what gets twisted. We found licensing officials who apparently rubber-stamped operations with serious violations year after year. Child care centers that should have been shut down, still operating, still collecting payments, and when concerned Americans try to investigate, they're finding the same patterns everywhere, except in cities like Salt Lake, where Democrat mayors are openly refusing to look into it. Now, here it is, Stephen Miller, dropping the single greatest fraud operation in U.S. history. We believe that we believe Ilhan's fraud operation in Minnesota is the single greatest theft. He calls it Ilhan's.
Believe that the Somali fraud operation in Minnesota is the single greatest theft of taxpayer dollars through welfare fraud in American history. We believe that we have only scratched the very top of the surface of how deep this goes. And you're familiar with all the scams with pretending that children have autism who are not in fact autistic, with pretending to enroll people in food programs when in fact nobody was ever enrolled, and engaging in massive fraud, lying, and theft and grift on a scale we've never seen before in American history. The total bill, the total tab for this is going to be far beyond the numbers we've already seen reported. We believe the state government is fully complicit in this scheme, and we believe that what we are going to uncover is going to shock the American people. Look, based on the records that we already have, and this is a significant undercount, by the way, 75% of the Somali population in Minnesota is on welfare. But that's likely a significant undercount of just how much of a financial burden the Somali refugee population is imposing on this country.
His explosive claim sets the stage now for the fraud schemes he's talking about. Here is Booker T. Jones. Non-emergency transportation companies in Minnesota billing Medicaid millions for transporting people to grocery stores, daycares, adult daycares, assisted living, doctor appointments. Somalians own most of the companies. Many are ghost addresses. Locals say the vans never move. Buckle up.
Here in Minnesota, there's businesses just like the one behind me. These are called non-emergency medical transportation businesses, where they have vans like this sitting out in the snow that have never even been moved. Neighbors say these vans haven't moved in months. Yet, the state of Minnesota has over 1,020 companies like this, and 90% of them are Somalian-owned. Each one of these businesses are collecting over $1 million a year. And what are they doing? They're saying that they're moving people around that have some type of medical emergency, but the neighbors say these vans never leave. And as you can look right there, there's snow built up around all of those vans. Those vans haven't moved for a long time. But in the state of Minnesota, they're literally paying companies just like this millions of dollars a year. Like I said, they're called non-emergency medical transportation companies, and there's over 90% of them in Minnesota that are owned by Somalians, collecting millions of taxpayer dollars a year, and the vans just sit like that all year long. This is going on in Minnesota, massive fraud. Let me know your thoughts on this one.
I'll tell you my thoughts. I'm pissed. Imagine all that money could have gone to that really help real people. Transportation fraud, one piece. Now we're going into the daycare fraud that's also being investigated. Wall Street apes. American is on the Minnesota Department of Human Services website under license lookup. She found a child care center. She says she knows for a fact the DHS worker is in on it. The American used to run a corporate adult foster care, so she knows how these licenses work. Check this out.
I am on the Minnesota Department of Human Services website under licensing lookup. Here's Sweet Angel Childcare. I'm on my tablet here. Whoever did their license review, we need to find out who the licensor is that did their inspections, because they're in on it, and I'm going to show you why. If you scroll down, I've already opened these up. It tells you here when their license review was. I used to own a corporate adult foster care, so I had to do the same kind of stuff. I had reviews all the time. There was little things that I had to make corrections on. I know what I'm talking about here. Okay. Here's their last one. December 4th, 25. Here are their several violations. I'm going to scroll kind of slow so you can read them, because the same ones happen every year. First aid, CPR, whatever. Over here, they haven't made their corrections yet since December. Okay. The last one before that was in 2024. A lot of the same pretty severe violations. They should have been shut down. They made corrections. It'll say correction documentation submitted and approved. Now go to 20. Scroll. 2023. Same violations. They never submitted any correction documentation. You usually have 30 days to submit your corrections, depending on what they are. None of them. The licensor that did this review gave them a pass and did not require them to make any corrections. The licensor is in on it.
The licensor is in on it. Isn't that how it always goes? There's always an insider. The insider investigation reveals system corruption. Now the fraud is spreading beyond Minnesota. Fraud schemes being uncovered in New York.
We are turning now to the Big Apple, where new multi-million-dollar fraud schemes are coming to light. Just this week, 2 scammers pleading guilty to a $68 million fraud scheme tied to the state's Medicaid home care program. Leah, what are we learning on this?
Yes, Natasha, we've been looking into this just this past week, as you mentioned, 2 big cases in court involving millions of dollars in kickbacks and fraudulent billing to Medicaid. And we're talking about another notable case tonight that involves a program called CDPAP. Now, if you're not familiar with that, it is for people who need to be cared for, but they don't want to go to a nursing home. So through Medicaid, they can hire their own caretaker. They get to choose if it's a friend or a relative as long as they go through the process. And while it sounds good, it is also a big target for scammers.
This is a program that is put in place to help care for people at their home instead of having them go in nursing homes.
Attorney John Flynn says while New York's Consumer-Directed Personal Assistance Program, or CDPAP, is meant to make things easier for loved ones who need care, it's also become the target of sophisticated scammers.
The actual program itself is for a good cause, but you have bad people out there who are taking advantage of federal and state money.
Just this past week, 2 New Yorkers pled guilty to a $68 million fraud scheme tied to CDPAP, billing Medicaid for services at Brooklyn-based adult daycares that never actually happened. These fraudsters were, quote, large-scale recruiters who bribed patients with laundered cash and billed Medicaid over $68 million for services that were not provided. New York Attorney General Letitia James announcing a separate $1 million-plus conviction this week, also involving fake billing and kickback schemes tied to the state's Medicaid program. Unfortunately for the state's CDPAP program, fraud is nothing new. Back in 2018, a man arranged for friends and family members to be paid as home caregivers for his sick mom. Later, investigators found out that his mom wasn't even in the country. She was living in Bangladesh. And during home inspections, his brother impersonated her to keep the fraud going. Back in 2024, Governor Kathy Hochul calling CDPAP a, quote, racket and one of the most abused programs in the entire history of the state of New York. News Nation reached out to the governor's office for comment on the recent fraud charges, and a spokesperson for the governor tells me she has, quote, taken steps to fix the system by cutting out hundreds of middlemen. Yet the fraud continues. And Natasha, the governor's office also telling me that one example of Letitia James busting the transportation company owner is an example of efforts to stop this kind of crime from happening. And when Republicans asked for an audit of the CDPAP program here in New York, Hochul calling that a political stunt, saying there are already measures in place. Clearly, a lot of government-funded programs are the target of scammers. And, of course, President Donald Trump announcing recently that new division to combat crimes like this. Natasha.
Buckle up, because Trump is coming. The fraud schemes are nationwide, but look how some officials are refusing to investigate. We have this from Libs of TikTok. Democrat Seattle Mayor Kate Wilson says she's refusing to investigate Somali daycare fraud in her city because it's racist. The Democrats are protecting fraudsters who steal money from the American people.
I mean, I don't think it needs to be explained why it's problematic to have random people showing up to daycares. I think the fear in the Somali community is real.
It's random? You think that just random people showing up? Those are called federal investigators, Missy. Okay, that's what their job is. So they have to follow the money, and the money trail goes right to the daycare. Oh, no, they're Somalis. It's racist. You see how they're playing the game here? Dude, this game is so old and so tired and so played out. Like, dude, just spare us.
Fear in immigrant communities are real, so we're taking that very seriously.
Along those lines, have you asked anyone to follow up on the fraud claims, either to the Department of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs or SPD?
No.
So as far as you're concerned right now, there's no reason to suggest there's any sort of fraud?
This whole issue is not really about fraud, right?
Oh, really?
It's about dividing and conquering. It's about making an immigrant community a target, right?
No, it's not.
No reason to assume, based on the identity of a daycare operator, that their small business is doing anything wrong.
It's not about the identity! not about based on the identity. No, it's not based on the identity. It's based on millions and millions of dollars being flushed and then sent to Somali terrorists. Dude. Okay. Oh. Here's a pro tip for you. Seattle's mayor refusing to investigate. Meanwhile, the legal system in Minnesota is also under scrutiny. Elon Musk calls for Judge Sarah West of Minnesota to be fired for throwing out a $7 million unanimous Somali fraud conviction. Unanimous conviction. The judge throws it out. The judge is probably in on the take, too. See, Reason writes, Secretary Scott Bessent, at a minimum, this judge needs to be audited to find out who paid her off. That's exactly what it said. While you're at it, why don't you audit all of them?
Action was the same as most Minnesotans. I was outraged. We've been dealing with this fraud for a long time. She acknowledges in her order that fraud was rampant in this case, and it was clearly out of control. She couldn't believe the level to which fraud was allowed to be able to be perpetrated. And then it comes to bear that she lets him off because she felt as though somebody else should have been to blame that wasn't the owner of the company. Judicial reform is needed in Minnesota. That is definitely true. But the judge absolutely was acting outside of her authority to do this. It's being already brought to the Minnesota Court of Appeals. So the Attorney General's office is appealing it. And I'm sure they're going to win on appeal. I'm not an attorney, but the precedent that she used was outrageous, and she applied it far wider than the law actually allows. At one point, she argued it because in many of the instances of fraud where a check was written, the defendant claims to have been in Bemidji, which is far, far northern Minnesota, hundreds of, or at least 100 miles away from where the fraud was physically taking place, as if computers don't exist or whatever. And she claims that because he was so far detached from the business, he didn't credibly know that the fraud was happening, which is of course insane, right? He cashed the $1 million worth of checks within like a night.
Cashing millions of dollars worth of checks. Oh, but he lived 100 miles away, so it couldn't possibly be him. Even the courts are being questioned. The political figures are being implicated in the scandal. Dinesh D'Souza. Here we go. Omar finally gets busted. There's no way she can spin this. Omar is being targeted by critics, but the accusations are getting more serious from other political figures. P.T. Tucker, Trump, Minnesota Democrats Tim Walz and Ilhan Omar using ICE operations to distract from the fraud scandal. Trump tying this to both Omar and Walz. Now, the state-level response to those claims. Minnesota State Senator Steve Draz. Tim Walz is complicit.
They have an agenda. Tim Walz is losing oil pressure rapidly. A large and growing number of Minnesotans would really like to see him in jail.
Yeah.
And we will see articles of impeachment introduced in the Minnesota House when the legislature convenes on the 17th of next month. He is complicit in the theft of over $9 billion by many of the same people that have been attacking federal officers for the past 2 weeks. He will condition any sort of investigation that the state does in order to continue to try to fit the far left narrative, which is a small fraction of a minority of Minnesotans. Most of Minnesota, Jackie, is operating normal. The vast majority of it is. Tim Walz and Jacob Fry are continuing to put this forward and get it going to the point that their media operatives in Minnesota who help them support their narrative will keep that narrative going.
That's what they do. That's why that's why the media exists for these folks, is to cover their ass. A Minnesota senator puts a dollar figure on Walz's alleged complicity. This builds into the ultimate demand that's being made. Eric Darty. President Trump just confirmed Ilhan Omar must be deported to Somalia because of her involvement in the billion-dollar fraud scandal. Quote, there was $19 billion in Minnesota Somali fraud. Fake Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, a constant complainer who hates the USA, knows it. Trump's deportation demand is the most explosive claim. And now we're going to tell you how the media coverage is being disputed. Nick Shirley calls out Andrew Callaghan. You tampered with our interview, and I've got the receipts. Nick Shirley caught Channel 5's Andrew Callaghan chopping their 2.5-hour conversation on Minnesota daycare fraud to a slick hour. Callaghan cut every part where he fumbled. Or, let's see.
All right, this is super important, and I also learned a great lesson here. So the other week, I sat down with Andrew Callaghan in Channel 5 to do a sit-down podcast-style interview for his channel. And when he goes and posts the video, I see he just posted an hour-long interview. I said, well, that's weird, because we actually spoke for around 2.5 hours. And then I go and watch the interview, and I'm saying, well, what is this? This is not what happened. For instance, this clip right here.
What American city is prospering right now?
Austin.
Austin. Name another one.
El Paso, Texas.
El Paso, Texas is prospering.
Yeah. Nashville's doing good. Phoenix is doing good. Basically, any place with low state tax is getting a lot of.
In any place that's not Democrat.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean,
name a Democrat city that's prospering right now.
Well, it would have to be one that's affordable.
Name one.
Denver.
Why are you smirking? It's not prospering.
All right, so that's the clip Andrew posted, but this is the actual interaction of how it went.
Denver.
Why are you smirking?
Because I don't know if it's prospering.
It's not. See, you can't even answer the question. It's not prospering. Denver's not prospering either.
I agree that Democrat-run states are doing badly.
Kind of weird that Andrew didn't put that in, right? Maybe his base or something would not be happy with that response because he obviously got caught lying. And anyways, let's move over to the next topic when we're talking about Somalians being known for pirating, as 89% of the fraud that has been charged inside of Minnesota is by Somalians. This is the interaction that Andrew posted.
Somali community, or do you see it as both?
89% of the fraud is being committed by Somalians.
Where exactly is that statistic from?
You can pull it up on the screen. You'll find it.
I just want to know where it's from.
You want me to find it right now?
For sure, just so I can, I don't know, I believe you. I just want to make sure we have the exact.
Here, right here. Yeah, and it's not racist to say it. Probably. And when I go.
This is what happens when I show him the fact that 89% of the people who have been charged for fraud in Minnesota are Somalians. This is what Andrew had to say. But remember, he conveniently left this out of the interview.
89% of those charged in connection with major.
Wow. Identified as Somali Americans.
Well, looks like we do there.
I'm interested to see what you put in this interview because
it looks like there's a problem with fraud.
So there you go. That's just two examples from the interview with Andrew Callaghan where he literally went out of his way to try and make me look bad, which is not cool. And I wouldn't say that's very benevolent of him to do by any means. But I promise you guys, if I ever do an interview with anyone, you're going to get the full product because I think that's just the most benevolent thing to do. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed and you guys were able to see through what I just showed you. The full interview is up on my second channel.
Yeah. Oh, the media loves to edit their interviews, don't they? President Trump certainly knows that. Even journalists covering the story are fighting over the facts. And now we have the public's demand for action. Do it. Don't just talk about it. She's anti-American. She was the ringleader of all the fraud in Minnesota of taxpayer money. Deport Ilhan Omar. So, the federal investigation has expanded because local officials won't act. When mayors refuse to investigate obvious fraud, when licensing officials ignore repeated violations, when snow-covered bands collect million-dollar contracts, that's not incompetence, that's a system designed to look the other way, while your money disappears. So the Minnesota scandal reveals how welfare fraud operates with government protection. Obvious schemes run for years while officials who should investigate actively refuse to act. The federal expansion suggests this corruption reaches far beyond one state. When basic oversight fails this completely, it's not accidental, it's institutional. Your tax dollars fund operations that exist only on paper while real services go underfunded. The question isn't whether fraud is happening. Neighbors can see the motionless vans. The question is how many officials are deliberately enabling it. Do you believe systematic welfare fraud requires government cooperation to succeed? Check out the next News Merch Shop.
The system controls information. Information control is power.
They don't want you to see this.
The truth only survives together. They don't want this shared. Share this now. You know out.